Hoa was born in a small riverside village where the gentle waters quietly flowed past vast rice fields, filling the air with a fragrant aroma. During each harvest season, the village seemed to be wrapped in an unusual tranquility. Mornings filled with the cheerful chirping of birds greeting the dawn, and evenings bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight casting its reflection on the familiar red dirt path. However, Hoa's life was far from peaceful like the picturesque village. Her parents passed away in an accident when she was just a toddler, leaving behind a deep void in her heart. The only person who could fill that emptiness was her grandmother, a frail yet remarkably resilient woman. With calloused hands and a face deeply lined with wrinkles, she was Hoa's only support, the sole guiding light in her life. The two lived in a small house nestled beneath a cluster of lush green bamboo trees, with a thatched roof that had been damaged countless times by storms. Their days were spent working diligently on a small plot of land behind their home, earning just enough for their modest meals. Despite the hardships, her grandmother never wavered in her boundless love and unwavering faith in human kindness. She would often sit beside Hoa, her eyes tinged with sorrow, yet ever so gentle, telling her stories about kindness and generosity. One quiet afternoon she said, "Hoa, there are things in this world that cannot be measured by money. You may be poor in material wealth, but never let your heart be poor in compassion." One summer morning, as the sun began to rise, the two carried bundles of fresh greens and set off along the familiar road stretching before them. On both sides of the road, the lush green rice fields were gradually turning into a golden hue, signaling an abundant harvest ahead. A cool breeze from the river swept through, carrying the fresh scent of earth and sky, creating a serene and peaceful atmosphere. Yet along this seemingly tranquil path, a sight made Hoa slow her steps. A man lay collapsed by the roadside, appearing as if he had endured the harshest days of his life. His clothes were tattered, his limbs frail, and his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Before him sat an old conical hat containing only a few scattered coins. The sight stirred a deep sense of sorrow in Hoa's heart. "Grandma, what happened to him?" Hoa asked softly, her voice tinged with worry. Her grandmother did not answer immediately. She set down her basket of vegetables and stepped closer to the man, speaking gently. "Sir, are you all right?" The man slowly lifted his gaze, his empty eyes filled with despair, his parched lips parted, barely able to form a few broken words. "I'm so hungry. I can't walk any further." Hoa looked at her grandmother, waiting for her response. Then, without hesitation, the old woman quietly searched her pocket and took out a small bundle of rice, the only breakfast for the two of them. Her aged but steady hands placed it into the man's grasp. "Eat, sir. Once you're full, you'll feel better." The man's hands trembled as he received the food, tears streaming down his sunken face. He stammered words of gratitude, his voice choked with emotion. Grandma stood beside them, her wide eyes fixed on her grandmother, as if searching for an explanation. But the old woman said nothing. She simply turned, hoisted the basket onto her shoulder, and continued walking. "Grandma," Grandma murmured once they had walked a distance, "we don't have much. Why did you give away our only breakfast?" Her grandmother stopped, turning to look at Hoa. In her eyes, it was as if an entire vast sky lay within them. "Oh, a kindness is not always something grand. Sometimes even the smallest act can change a person's life. Remember, when you give kindness, you lose nothing. On the contrary, you are planting a seed of goodness in your own life." That sentence, along with the image of her grandmother offering the rice bundle that morning, was etched deeply into Hoa's memory, a lesson that would stay with her forever. She had no idea that this lesson in compassion would one day become a guiding torch, leading her through life's storms and illuminating the paths of many others in the years to come. Years later, Hoa left her hometown, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and her grandmother's teachings, as she embarked on a new journey in a vast and unfamiliar city. The city unfolded before her like a vibrant painting, towering skyscrapers reaching for the sky, dazzling lights piercing through the night, and crowds of people rushing endlessly through the busy streets. Yet, beneath the glamour and grandeur, Hoa felt small and lost. A tiny rented room, tucked away in a narrow alley, became her first shelter in this new world. Every morning she woke to the calls of street vendors echoing from the alleyway, peering out the window to see the city already in motion. Life here waited for no one, and Hoa quickly realized that to survive she had to keep moving, perhaps even run. To afford tuition and living expenses, Hoa took a part-time job at a small tea shop. The work was exhausting, with long hours of standing and serving customers. Her hands grew red and sore from washing hundreds of cups and glasses each day. But Hoa never complained. Deep down, she constantly reminded herself that every drop of sweat she shed was a step closer to her dream. One day, the university announced the list of scholarship recipients for students facing financial hardship. When Hoa saw her name on the notice board, she couldn't believe her eyes. Her heart pounded and her eyes lit up with happiness. That scholarship was like a beam of light piercing through her challenging life, easing the burden of daily survival. The next morning, Hoa woke up early. She carefully chose a white shirt, old but neatly pressed, and a pair of worn-out out shoes that, despite their faded color, were still clean. Her heart overflowed with joy and hope as she walked along the crowded streets on her way to school. However, just as she turned a corner, a sight made her steps come to an abrupt halt. An elderly woman sat huddled by the roadside, frail and shivering. Her faded ale dye was covered in dust, and her trembling hands held out a small empty bowl. Her clouded eyes drifted aimlessly as crowds of people hurried past without stopping. Her face bore the marks of exhaustion, and her thin shoulders seemed ready to collapse under the weight of poverty and age. Hoa stood still, feeling as if time had suddenly frozen around her. The sight of the old woman before her evoked the familiar image of her grandmother. Frail yet warm, aged yet always radiating quiet strength. Her heart tightened. "Grandma, are you okay?" Hoa stepped forward and gently asked. The elderly woman looked up, her clouded eyes flickering with a faint light. In a trembling voice, she whispered, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten in a long time." Hoa knelt down, her gaze fixed on the empty bowl in the old woman's hands. Inside her bag was the envelope containing the scholarship money she had just received. At that moment, her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Remember, kindness is not always something grand. Sometimes even the smallest act can change a person's life. Those words swept away all hesitation. Hoa quietly took out the envelope and placed it in the elderly woman's hands. "Please take this and buy yourself something to eat. I don't have much, but I hope it will help you through this difficult time." The old woman's eyes widened, as if unable to believe what had just happened. Her trembling hands clutched the envelope tightly, and silent tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. Thank you so much," she whispered, her voice quivering with emotion. Hoa smiled gently and took the woman's cold, frail hands into her own. "Please take care of yourself." Then she stood up and walked away quickly, afraid that if she lingered any longer, she might hesitate. Her heart felt lighter, yet her mind was restless. Did I do the right thing? The question echoed within her, but she didn't need an answer at that moment. On the day of the scholarship award ceremony, Hoa did not attend. Instead, she returned to her small rented room and sat quietly by the window, gazing at the dazzling city lights. She knew that her decision might make life more difficult, yet deep inside, she felt a sense of peace. Softly, as if speaking to herself, she murmured, "Grandma, I haven't forgotten your words. Today, I chose to give kindness, just as you once did. I believe that doing the right thing will always hold meaning, even if I can't see it yet." What Hoa didn't realize was that this small act of kindness was merely the beginning of a series of life-changing events, ones that would not only reshape her own destiny, but also bring light to many others. After helping the elderly woman on the street, Hoa felt a weight lift from her heart, as if she had just let go of an invisible burden. She didn't dwell on the act, considering it simply a small gesture to keep her conscience at peace. But fate seemed to have its own plans, quietly steering her life in a direction she never expected. One evening, after finishing her shift at the tea shop, Hoa walked slowly along the crowded street. The fading sunlight stretched across the pavement, filtering through the tree branches. Suddenly, in the distance, she spotted a familiar figure. The elderly woman from before was sitting huddled under a tree by the roadside, looking even more frail than before. Hoa stepped closer and gently asked, "Grandma, you're still here? Are you all right?" The elderly woman looked up, her eyes lost but flickering with a glimmer of hope upon seeing Hoa. Her voice trembled, nearly breaking into despair. "I have nowhere to go." Hoa's heart clenched. The image of her grandmother surfaced in her mind, reminding her that she couldn't turn her back on this woman in need. Without hesitation, Hoa helped her up and guided her back to her tiny rented room. The room was barely 10 square meters, with a rickety single bed, an old wooden table, and a few essential belongings. Yet to the elderly woman, this small space was far better than wandering the cold streets. Hoa gave up her bed for her, settling herself on a thin mattress on the floor. In the early days of living together, Hoa did her best to care for the old woman as if she were her own grandmother. Though life was already difficult, she willingly shared her meager meals. Some nights their only food was a bowl of plain rice porridge with a few green onions. But Hoa still smiled and said softly, "Please eat, Grandma. This is enough for me." However, as days passed, Hoa gradually realized that the elderly woman, whose name was Han, was not like an ordinary vagrant. The way she spoke, her words articulate and refined, hinted at a past filled with knowledge and experience. Despite her frail appearance, Mrs. Han still carried the grace of someone who had once lived a life of comfort. Her demeanor, her gaze, all reflected a deep wisdom and experience. One evening, as Hoa was studying under the soft glow of her desk lamp, she happened to notice Mrs. Han sitting silently by the window, holding a small wooden box in her hands. The dim light cast gentle shadows on her face, highlighting the profound sadness in her eyes. Cole quietly observed. The wooden box looked old but was intricately carved, its lid adorned with delicate classic patterns. With careful hands, Mrs. Han slowly opened it, revealing a dainty gold ring with a jade green gemstone at its center. On the inside of the band, a finely engraved inscription read, "Forever Together." At that moment, time seemed to stand still. Mrs. Han's gaze remained fixed on the ring, her fingers trembling slightly. A single tear slipped down her cheek, glistening as it landed on the ring's polished surface. "Mrs. Han," Hoa called softly, unable to suppress her curiosity. "Whose ring is this?" Startled, Mrs. Han quickly closed the box. For a brief moment, a flicker of hesitation crossed her eyes, but she soon regained her composure. "Just an old keepsake," she said with a quiet voice. "It's nothing important. Don't worry about it." Yet her eyes told a different story. They held a depth of unspoken sorrow, as if within them lay an entire tale she either could not or would not share. From that day on, Han couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Han. She wondered, how could a frail, destitute old woman possess such a precious piece of jewelry? What was the meaning behind the inscription, "Forever Together," on the ring? Despite her growing curiosity, Hoa refrained from asking. She could sense that Mrs. Han was carrying a sorrow too deep, a secret she was not yet ready to reveal. And yet, that very mystery only made Hoa more intrigued and concerned. In the days that followed, Hoa quietly observed her more closely. At times, Mrs. Han would sit by the window, her gaze lost in the distance, as if searching for something long gone. Other times, she would remain silent for extended moments, her hands clasped tightly together as if trying to hold on to some lingering warmth. And whenever she held that wooden box, a profound sadness would flicker across her face, one so deep that words could never fully capture it. Hoa knew that Mrs. Han was not just some nameless wanderer, as her appearance suggested. Her past must have been filled with turbulence and loss. But what had led her to this state? And why had fate brought them together? Something in Hoa's heart told her that their encounter was not mere coincidence. There was an invisible thread connecting them, and she was determined to do whatever she could to help Mrs. Han. Despite her own hardships, Hoa had no idea that the presence of Mrs. Han would change her life forever. One morning, soft sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm golden hue over the small room. As Hoa woke up, she noticed an unusual silence filling the air. She glanced around, but Mrs. Han was nowhere to be seen. The blanket she usually used was neatly folded at the edge of the bed, and the mysterious wooden box was gone as well. "Mrs. Han," Hoa called softly, a hint of worry in her voice. There was no response. Only an eerie silence lingered in the room. Her gaze suddenly fell on the old wooden table. Resting on its surface was a neatly placed letter, accompanied by a small wildflower. With trembling hands, she picked up the letter, an uneasy feeling settling deep in her heart. The carefully written words of Mrs. Han unfolded before her. "Hoa, thank you for your kindness. One day you will understand that everything you've done carries a meaning far greater than you realize. Do not look for me, for I must continue my journey. Always believe that your kindness will never be in vain." Han, as Hoa finished reading, a whirlwind of emotion surged within her. Her heart tightened, an overwhelming emptiness washing over the small room. Why had Mrs. Han left without saying goodbye? Where was she going, and for what reason? The unanswered questions swirled relentlessly in her mind, leaving behind an ache that refused to fade. In the days that followed, Hoa often found herself staring at the empty bed where Mrs. Han used to sit every evening. The image of her, with those deep, sorrowful eyes and the small wooden box, remained vivid in Hoa's mind. Yet she held no resentment. She believed Mrs. Han had her own reasons for leaving. Weeks passed. One afternoon, as Hoa was studying in her small room, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A mailman stood outside, holding an elegant envelope with shimmering gold trim. Surprised, Hoa accepted it and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a beautifully designed invitation card. "We cordially invite Miss Gwen T. Hoa to attend the appreciation ceremony for acts of kindness to be held on Thursdays at Con Kong Hall, Ho Chi Minh City." Hoa read the words over and over, confusion swirling in her mind. Why had she received this invitation? Who was behind it? Despite her uncertainty, curiosity soon overshadowed hesitation. On the appointed day, Hoa decided to attend. The grand hall, situated in the heart of the city, was unlike anything Hoa had ever known. As the large doors swung open, a dazzling space unfolded before her. Warm lights illuminated the room. Pristine white tablecloths adorned every table, fresh flowers were arranged elegantly, and well-dressed guests engaged in lively conversation. Feeling both out of place and intrigued, Hoa stepped inside. A polite receptionist approached her and guided her to a seat near the stage. As the stage lights brightened, the host stepped forward, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. A short video began playing on the large screen, telling a story of kindness and generosity. Hoa sat in silence as the images unfolded. A story about a poor girl who, despite her own hardships, chose to give up her scholarship and take in a lonely elderly woman. The footage recreated the moment she brought the old woman to her small rented room, the simple yet heartwarming meals they shared. As the video ended, the host continued, "This story has touched the hearts of many. Today, we want to introduce a very special person, someone who not only changed the life of that elderly woman, but also spread the true essence of kindness." Before Hoa could process what was happening, a familiar figure stepped onto the stage, Mrs. Han, but she was no longer the frail, destitute old woman Hoa had once met. Standing before her was an elegant lady dressed in a sophisticated outfit. Her eyes radiated confidence, yet they also held deep emotion. "Hoa," Mrs. Han met her gaze, her warm voice filling the hall. "I know this is unexpected for you, but today I want you to understand why I left without saying goodbye." "Hoa, Hoa sat, frozen, her heart nearly stopping. She couldn't take her eyes off the woman in front of her. It all felt like a dream. Mrs. Han continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I was never the poor, homeless woman you thought I was. In truth, I am the founder of the Onsang charity organization. After losing the people I loved most, I lost faith in human kindness. I abandoned everything and disguised myself as a homeless person in search of the true meaning of life. And it was you, a young girl willing to help without expecting anything in return, who restored my faith." Mrs. Han's voice echoed through the silent hall, each word engraving itself into the minds of everyone present. "You are the one who helped me regain my faith in human kindness. Today, I want to honor you, not just for what you did for me, but because you have taught me a profound lesson about the meaning of life." Tears streamed down Hoa's cheeks. She was at a loss for words, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't describe. That evening, Mrs. Han presented Hoa with a gift, a full scholarship and a promise to stand by her side in her journey to spread kindness. She gently held Hoa's hand, her voice warm yet unwavering. "You are not just someone who gives. You are an inspiration to so many others." Hoa nodded, determination shining in her eyes. She knew that her journey was only beginning, and from this moment on, she would devote herself to spreading the values she believed in: kindness, compassion, and faith in humanity. Mrs. Han gazed at her with deep understanding and affection. The chandelier's soft glow illuminated her face, highlighting the lines etched by time and loss. In her hands was a carefully wrapped folder. With a gentle motion, she pushed it toward Hoa, as if offering a part of herself. "This is a full scholarship that I want you to have." Her voice was calm yet resolute. "You need this to continue your journey. I truly believe that with your heart and determination, you will accomplish great things." Grandma froze, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the folder. Her heart pounded, not from joy, but from the overwhelming mix of emotions surging within her. "Grandma," Hoa's voice trembled. "I didn't do it expecting anything in return. I just thought it was the right thing to do. I don't deserve this gift." Mrs. Han smiled, her eyes filled with warmth and boundless love. She gently held Hoa's hands, hands that bore the roughness of a life weathered by countless hardships. Ho, she said softly yet firmly, "It is precisely because you expected nothing in return that you deserve this even more. True kindness does not seek repayment, but sometimes you must allow yourself to receive help so that you can continue to share the goodness you carry within you." Hoa sat in silence. Mrs. Han's words were both gentle and profound, like a soothing breeze dissolving all her doubts. She looked at the folder in her hands, then into the encouraging gaze of Mrs. Han. A deep sense of conviction welled up inside her. "Grandma," Hoa said, her eyes shining with determination, "I promise I won't let this opportunity go to waste. I will use it to study, to grow, and to help even more people." Mrs. Han nodded, a proud smile gracing her lips. "I know you will. You are the light I have been searching for all these years." In the days that followed, Hoa embarked on her new journey with a heart full of hope. But the road ahead was far from easy. Even with the scholarship, student life came with its own set of challenges. Each day began at dawn and only ended when the city was cloaked in darkness. Hoa worked part-time at the library, served at a coffee shop, and took on tutoring jobs in the evenings to earn extra income. No matter how exhausted she was, Hoa never let hardships break her spirit. But what pained her the most wasn't the workload or academic pressure. It was the whispers and judgments of those around her. At school, watchful, scrutinizing eyes were always on her. One day, as she sat alone in a quiet corner of the courtyard, hastily eating a homemade lunch, a group of students walked by. A mocking laugh rang out. "Look at that! She probably can't afford to eat out, so she brings her own food. How pitiful!" Those words stung like needles, piercing her pride. But instead of getting angry, she clenched her fists and reminded herself, "I didn't come here to please them. I came here to learn, to grow, and to chase my dreams." In a group project, she was once excluded. One of her teammates scoffed. "What does she even know? She'll only drag our results down." Hoa lowered her head and remained silent. But that night, she stayed up alone, studying and completing the tasks she believed she could contribute to. As time passed, her relentless efforts began to bear fruit. In a crucial exam, she scored the highest in the class, surpassing even the most outstanding students. When her name was announced, the room fell into silence. Then a round of applause erupted. But for Hoa, this wasn't a moment of validation. It was merely a small step on the long journey ahead. Hoa never stopped striving, never stopped pushing forward, even as new challenges awaited her. During an internship at a nonprofit organization, she was assigned to oversee a small project aimed at supporting underprivileged children in remote areas. Standing before these children, eyes bright yet filled with hardship, she realized that her own struggles were nothing compared to theirs. Throwing herself into the work with unwavering dedication, she collaborated with her colleagues, visiting each family to understand their circumstances and find effective solutions. The project was a resounding success, not only granting hundreds of children the chance to attend school, but also bringing newfound hope to struggling communities. On the final day of the project, a shy little boy approached her and handed her a drawing. In the picture, a young woman stood surrounded by children with clumsy yet heartfelt words written below. Ms. Wah, the one who brings us smiles. Hoa held the drawing, tears silently falling, but in her heart was a joy beyond words. She realized that what she was doing was not just about proving herself, it was about spreading kindness to those who needed it most. And every night, as she looked up at the sky, she remembered Mrs. Han's encouraging gaze and her grandmother's wisdom. Kindness doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes, even the smallest act can change a life. Ho's journey was far from over, but she knew she was walking the right path, the path her heart had always been drawn to. Upon graduation, she left school with top honors, carrying with her a greater purpose than ever before. Ho returned to her riverside village, the place where her roots lay. The bus rumbled down the uneven roads, revealing vast golden rice fields stretching endlessly under the glow of the setting sun. Stepping off the bus, she took a deep breath, letting the familiar breeze wash over her, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant chatter of farmers calling to one another. Everything seemed unchanged, but as her eyes settled on the children playing by the riverbank, she realized a painful truth. Despite the passing years, poverty still weighed heavily on this village. The children remained out of school, and their families continued to toil in the mud, struggling for each meal. Looking into their bright yet innocent eyes, Hoa felt a deep ache in her heart. The fire inside her, the same fire that had burned in her as a poor young girl, ignited once more. That evening, as she sat on the front steps of her home, memories of her childhood flooded back. She recalled the nights her grandmother patiently taught her to read, their only light the flickering glow of an old oil lamp. The worn-out books that her grandmother had painstakingly saved up to buy had opened an entirely new world for her, giving her the wings to dream beyond poverty. And then a thought struck her. If I could bring the light of knowledge to these children, perhaps their lives could change too. With that conviction, Hoa made a bold decision. She would build a community library for the village, a place where children could access knowledge, learn, and nurture their dreams. But when she shared her idea with the villagers, resistance came crashing down like a cold, relentless storm. A library? In this village? People here can barely afford to eat. Who has time for books? An elderly man scoffed. What a waste. Books won't fill empty stomachs. She's been educated too much and now she's dreaming up impossible things, another villager muttered, shaking his head. Hoa felt her heart sink. The weight of their words pressed heavily upon her, but deep inside, the fire within her refused to be extinguished. Disappointment flickered in Hoa's heart for a brief moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I cannot let their words extinguish the fire inside me. If I give up now, who will do this for the children? Determined to press on, she began seeking help. Hoa wrote letters to charitable organizations and reached out to old friends for funding. Yet the initial responses were scarce. Some even rejected her outright. The first few days were incredibly difficult, but she refused to lose hope. With the little savings she had, Hoa bought a few stacks of old books and a small signboard. She set up a reading corner beneath the village's ancient banyan tree, a place where children often gathered to play. At first, only a handful of curious kids stopped by. They picked up the books but didn't know how to read them. Patiently, Hoa sat with them, guiding them through each letter and narrating the stories within the pages. Gradually, more children began to gather, their eyes lighting up as they flipped through the books, as if discovering a whole new world. Seeing this, some of the villagers started to change their perception. Hoa started to talk to them about it, not just other kids. One afternoon, a mother quietly approached Hoa, placing a woven bamboo basket in her hands with a few crumpled banknotes inside. Miswa, I don't have much, but this is a small token to help you buy more books for the children. Not long after, a village carpenter volunteered to build small wooden shelves to keep the books organized. Farmers pitched in to clear an unused plot of land beside the communal house, preparing a space for the library. A single spark had begun to spread. Bit by bit, the village's sense of unity and compassion was rekindled. Hoa's perseverance had begun to touch the hearts of the villagers. One day, the elderly man who had once dismissed her idea stood quietly by the reading corner, watching the children laugh and chatter. together. He let out a deep sigh, then turned to Hoa and said in a solemn tone, "Child, I was wrong. You were right. This library is exactly what our village needs. If you need anything, just let me know." Hearing those words, Hoa felt a lump rise in her throat. She could sense a shift in the hearts of the people around her. Her dream, however small, was finally being embraced. In the days that followed, the entire village came together. Some contributed their labor, others donated what they could. Brick by brick, stack by stack of old books, the library slowly took shape. Watching the villagers work with bright smiles, Hoa felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. That little library, with just a few wooden bookshelves and simple tables and chairs, was like a warm flame in the cold winter night. But for Hoa, this was just the beginning. She believed that from this small spark, the light of knowledge and hope would spread throughout the village. After months of hard work, the Light Library was finally inaugurated, welcomed with excitement and anticipation from the entire community. That morning, the soft sunlight bathed the library's white walls, illuminating the wooden sign where the words, "Light, a place to nurture hope," were delicately engraved. The gentle breeze carried the scent of the fields, blending with the lively chatter of villagers who had gathered early, turning the event into a grand celebration. The children, once accustomed to days spent covered in mud from the rice fields, now stood eagerly, ready to step into a whole new world of knowledge and possibilities. Today, dressed in their cleanest clothes, the children eagerly gathered in front of the library, their eyes sparkling like precious gems. The adults had also assembled. Elderly villagers, fathers and mothers, those who had once doubted Hoa's dream, now stood silently, gazing at the structure built from her unwavering dedication. Standing in the center of the courtyard, Hoa's heart pounded, yet her hands remained clenched, as if trying to steady herself in this pivotal moment. As the library doors swung open, rows of wooden bookshelves filled with hundreds of colorful books came into view, illuminating the entire space. The children squealed in delight and rushed inside. Their tiny hands carefully flipped through the crisp pages as if uncovering a magical new world. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, is this the house of books? Does it have fairy tales like the ones you always tell me?" The mother smiled gently, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes, my love, this is where you will learn all the things I never had the chance to know." Laughter and chatter filled the library, blending with the soft rustling of freshly opened books. The atmosphere felt unusually warm, like a symphony bursting with life. Carrying newfound hope and belief, what moved Hoa the most was the sight of Hung, a young man who once dropped out of school due to poverty, patiently teaching little Tam how to fix an old bicycle in the corner of the library. Hung had once been one of the poorest children in the village, but thanks to the library, he learned mechanical skills, and now he had returned to pass on his knowledge to kids just like him in the past. "You have to study hard, Tam," Hung said gently as he carefully guided the boy's hands. "One day, when you grow up, you'll be able to fix things around the house and help others." Standing quietly, Hoa felt tears roll down her cheeks. It wasn't just emotion. It was pride. Every small effort she had made, every day she had persevered without giving up, had now led to something truly meaningful. But the journey had never been easy. She recalled those early days of struggle when villagers opposed her, dismissing the library as nothing more than an unrealistic dream. She remembered the nights spent alone under dim light, painstakingly drafting letters to seek sponsorship. She remembered the times she had to wipe away tears and summon the strength to rise again after facing rejection. She also remembered the moments she questioned herself. Am I on the wrong path? Can I really do this? That question had once haunted Hoa, but now as she stood in the library courtyard, watching the children engrossed in their books, seeing the villagers gather around with borrowed books, both old and new, she knew that every struggle, every ounce of effort had been truly worthwhile. One evening, after everyone had left, Hoa stood alone in the courtyard, gazing up at the starry sky. The gentle breeze brushed past her, carrying with it distant memories of her grandmother and Mrs. Han. Their kind eyes and wise words resurfaced vividly in her mind. She whispered softly, as if speaking to herself, "Grandma, you were right. Kindness doesn't have to be grand, but it has the power to change a life, even an entire community. I've taken the first step, but I know this is only the beginning." As time passed, the Light Library became more than just a place for reading and learning. It became the heart of the village. Adults came to gain knowledge about farming techniques and livestock care. Children not only learned to read, but also participated in life skills classes and meaningful storytelling sessions. One day, Hoa received a drawing from a young boy. In the picture, a woman stood among a group of children, and below it, in clumsy yet heartfelt handwriting, were the words, "Miss Hoa, the one who brought light to our village. Holding the drawing in her hands, an overwhelming wave of emotion surged through her. Hoa knew that the flame she had ignited from the very first day had now spread far beyond anything she had ever dared to dream. But she also understood that her journey was far from over. Standing in the library courtyard, she gazed toward the distant horizon, her eyes filled with determination. In her heart, she made a silent promise. She would not stop here. She would continue to spread the light of knowledge and hope to the places that needed it most, just as she had done for this beloved village. On the day of the Light Library's inauguration, the sky seemed brighter than usual. Golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a warm glow over the courtyard where hundreds of people had gathered in joy and pride. The laughter of children echoed through the air, blending harmoniously with the sound of footsteps and lively conversations. The library was no longer just a building. It had become a symbol of hope and transformation. As she stood in the courtyard, Hoa's heart swelled with emotion at the sight of the villagers' radiant faces. The hardships, the sleepless nights, the silent tears she had once endured, all seemed to dissolve in this very moment. She felt joy spreading through the air like a refreshing breeze, carrying with it the essence of unity and togetherness. At that moment, Mrs. Han slowly approached Hoa. She still carried that same graceful presence, her sharp yet gentle eyes filled with quiet understanding. Gently placing her hand on Hoa's shoulder, Mrs. Han's warm voice rose above the murmurs of the crowd. You have done something truly remarkable. But then, with eyes full of understanding, she continued, but you must remember, this is only the beginning. There is still a long journey ahead of you. Hoa looked up at her, her eyes shining with determination, reflecting the trust that Mrs. Han had given her since the very beginning. Grandmother, her voice trembled slightly, yet carried unwavering resolve. I know that the road ahead will not be easy, but I believe that as long as I hold on to my faith and kindness, I will overcome anything. Mrs. Han smiled gently, a hint of emotion flickering in her eyes. You haven't just changed your own life, Hoa. You've changed an entire community. But always remember, light only truly spreads when it is shared. Hoa nodded, her hands tightening with renewed determination. She turned back to look at the library, the very place she once thought was just a distant dream. The neatly arranged bookshelves, the children engrossed in their reading, the villagers gathering to share their stories. Every scene was a priceless reward for all her efforts. As the golden sunset bathed the village in its warm glow, Hoa quietly left the library courtyard and walked toward the riverbank. The gentle currents continued to flow, mirroring the crimson hues of the setting sun. She stood there gazing at the shimmering water, her heart swelling with emotion. Memories flooded back, the image of her grandmother by the dim oil lamp, the childhood days filled with hardships, yet overflowing with love, and the wise words of Mrs. Han. Kindness does not have to be grand, but it has the power to create miracles. Hoa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Love and hope filled every corner of her heart. She knew her journey was far from over, because from a single small act, a great change could begin. She had witnessed the power of change and believed that, with faith and determination, the light from the small flame she had ignited would continue to spread, illumining the lives of others, just as she herself had once been guided by its glow. Under the golden sunset, Hoa stood tall by the riverbank, her eyes fixed on the future. Though the path ahead was long and filled with challenges, she would keep moving forward, for she had chosen the road of hope and compassion, the path her heart had always told her was right. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this meaningful story. Through this tale, we hope you recognize the true value of kindness, generosity, and unwavering belief in the good. Sometimes even the smallest act of kindness, when done with sincerity, can change a life or even an entire community. If this story has touched your heart and you wish to spread its message further, please like this post, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to join us on more inspiring journeys ahead. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue bringing meaningful stories to life. Thank you sincerely.